event. Xiaofei, please.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Mei Hui, for the introduction. So I'll just give a very, very short opening address, if you like, to start the event proper. So the COVID-19 has actually introduced a whole new paradigm shift, right, in the way we work, we play, we still play, and we live, and it has changed everything, especially in the digital transformation, that particular domain, right? I think everybody feels it, whether you are in the IT industry or you are in the legal industry or wherever you're from. So today, I'm actually very happy that we have opened up the event to invite our friends from ACCA, IBF, SAL, and SMF to join us. So I can't see all of you, but I think that there are quite a number of you who have signed up. So welcome to the webinar. So today's topic is on scaling cybersecurity in hybrid work environment. So quite a mouthful, but let me just maybe talk about this in a very candid way to say why we actually chose this topic. So if you have noticed just now when maybe was pausing just waiting for everyone to come in and starting 2:05 and all that stuff, right? So there was an absence of sound, there was an absence of music, right? And it wasn't by intention. Actually, we were intending to play some music during the opening as everybody came in, but somehow the music didn't work. So you will rate this as a major, maybe a minor annoyance lah. But think about it this way: you have a major meeting with your stakeholders or your management, right? And you have hosted something digitally online, and something like this happens. So unbeknownst to you, actually, it could have been a cyber attack or somebody actually fiddling around with the controls without you knowing, right? So how would you actually deal with something like that when you are working from home? You have no immediate access to help, and you have the management actually there waiting for you to start your presentation. So this is really scary, not just for the employees, for us, but also for everyone. Actually, not just people who are in the IT industry, but for everyone. So first of all, you have to be aware that cybersecurity now transcends beyond really the technical, the geeky stuff they talk about, like hacking, all the stuff, because it's now much closer to us than you can imagine. And then the second thing will be on actually how do we respond to threats like ransomware and all this stuff. I'm not sure how many of you have been keeping up the news, but someone in Germany died, unfortunately. And the reason for the mishap is actually ransomware, because the hospital couldn't take the patient in because it was infected by ransomware. So in a way, the indirect consequences of cybersecurity attacks, if you like, attacks and all these incidents are far-reaching and beyond what we could imagine even before COVID. So the whole nuancing of cybersecurity has changed. It is not a technical issue anymore. In fact, it has never been, but it has brought the issue closer to the business. Well, I don't know whether it's a good or bad thing, but everybody is not talking about cybersecurity. Everybody is quite concerned. And that's why probably you're here. The third and last point that I want to just share before we start the event proper is something about what I hold quite closely to what I do in my day job as well. It's called resilience, right? Resilience is not about being prepared, but it is about being prepared to come back, to recover from an incident. Say, for example, COVID, right? The reason why Singapore was able to come back as quickly as we have, although we are still, in phase 2. But I think we have done quite a good job in terms of coming back, and now we are seeing close to 0 community infections per day. So that is what I call by resilience. You have to actually enroll the whole community together to come together and address the situation collectively. You can't just depend on one agency or one organization to do it. So that is why we are talking to you today. We have invited esteemed speakers from the industry. And basically, SCS is that. We offer a voice for professionals in the industry to share knowledge, to help everybody skill up, and also to be able to improve the ecosystem. So with that, without further ado, I'll hand it back to Mei Hui, and I hope you enjoy today's webinar. And also, I don't know whether we can flash the slide on the next TIG event. Can we do so? Yeah, no, this one. So we have another event for similar to this one, and it's the topic is on data innovation. How will it impact you? So this is another hot topic that is everybody has the finger on the pulse of data today. But more than just talking about data innovations, digitalizations, the webinar will actually discuss how to deal with data safely and responsibly, because consumers actually the whole landscape has changed today. People are more concerned about their security, about the data security, with the safe entry and all those stuff, right? So people are a lot more conscious. And even if you read the news today, Shopify, data breach happened this morning. Not this morning, it was announced this morning. So this is something that a lot of accounting, legal, as well as technology experts in Singapore and also globally are actually quite concerned about. So I encourage you to also register and attend this event next month in October. So with that, Mei Hui, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Xiaofei. So now I would like to invite our first speaker. He's Teo Xiangzhen from Ensign Security, and he'll be sharing about managing cybersecurity incidents before crisis. So Xiangzhen, please.
Thanks, Mei Hui. So hi, I'm Xiangzhen, head of advisory and consulting at Ensign Security. Yeah, I think I've had the screen shared. So I borrowed quite liberally the photos that you're seeing right here. The topic that I'm addressing is really managing cyber incidents before it becomes a crisis. And the photos actually depict a typical scenario. I borrowed it liberally on the 9/11 photographs. But basically, there are different kinds of incidents at hand. You can have a small fire, and relating back to us in our daily lives, we can have a small fire at our kitchen stove, which is clearly contained. We can put it out quite easily. And you have fires that are the whole house is burning, or actually the whole building is burning. And the bottom photo actually presents itself as a crisis situation, the aftermath of the crisis. Now, when we take that into consideration, what are we really need to be contextualizing? On a day-to-day basis, we will see a number of incidents, and incidents within the IT and even in the cyber perspective can have different meanings and nuances. Now, from an IT perspective, an incident is just an irregularity that happens as a part of the services that we expect to receive. Maybe an application seems to be laggy, a particular function doesn't work as it is intended. And so from an IT incident standpoint, there's no escalating situation that you're really thinking about. Now, I think Xiaofei brought up an earlier point where, sometimes an irregularity, like for example, we expect music to be playing and actually it doesn't play, that could actually lead towards a possibility of a cyber situation. And what really I have on screen is to show a depiction of that. Now, if we think about the day-to-day situation, the green part, which is reduced, is the peacetime situation. That's where you run your business operations as usual. You may conduct certain training, awareness, simulation exercises. You have the luxury of time to do planning and playbooks development, and maybe also brush up a bit of your crisis communications template. Now, that being said, while I say peacetime, it doesn't mean that there's no incidents at all. The gray bars here illustrate, there is certain incidents, the activities and the intensity or the counts could be rising in nature. And after a certain point, you would then say, actually a major incident has begun, right? As the major incident begun, you will naturally master all the resources together so that you can go into what we call the response. And that basically is the incident response phase, right? At the incident response phase, clearly in terms of intensity of activity is at the peak, and you are really trying to work it down to a more manageable state. These three bars, as has been communicated in COVID-19 management, is also something that's very familiar to us. How do we temper the resources so that we temper the situation such that the resources we have on hand can address the incidents that we are able to handle, right? At a certain point in time in the incident response, there may come a state where, because of certain thresholds are exceeded, certain conditions are met, you would then raise it to a state of crisis. And clearly at a state of crisis, you would then muster even more resources, escalate that awareness, and be able to carry on the subsequent activities. So in this case, could be crisis management, crisis communications, business continuity management, and disaster recovery. Now, all these activities, the main purpose is to go towards a recover and resume state, and hopefully go to a restoration of normalcy. And I think the term right now with COVID-19 is becoming familiar. It's either you actually restore to a state which was before, or you restore to a state of what we call the new normal, so that people can move along. It is essential when we are looking at incidents to understand the necessary conditions and thresholds that we will cross before it reaches a state of crisis. That awareness within an organization will ensure a level of confidence to be able to manage the chaos that unfolds in a state of incidents management and crisis management. Now, what some of the key conditions that we need to think about is as follows. On the left-hand side, we are looking at confidentiality, integrity, availability. What are some of the criteria that we need to cross before we see that an incident has actually become a crisis? Whether there are capability or capacity limitations within the organization. To elaborate, it could be, for example, an organization where you only have one cybersecurity person or one IT security manager, but really no other team members supporting him. So in that perspective, your capacity to be able to address a cyber incident could be severely limited. Now, you could say that, okay, I can leverage on outsourced service providers, but then you also need to have that cognizant. You have to be cognizant about, are your service providers able to provide you those services that you expect, when you expect it, and at what level of service expectations have you established with them? The next thing will be about collateral impact. I think critical towards that is, does that impact go beyond the organization? Does it impact, say, your customers and people in the supply chain or your business ecosystem? Those collateral impacts would clearly implicate a condition where you might want to consider escalating towards a state of crisis. Regulatory implications, I think it's quite straightforward. If something leads towards a natural penalty or obligation, that's really something that the organization needs to pay attention to, and whether what thresholds needs to be crossed so that you actually need to recognize a state of crisis for the organization. Now, last and not least is really the sustained detrimental business impact, right? How much of a damage is it something that you can deal with within hours, days, weeks, months, or much longer? That level of understanding will determine whether is it a state of crisis or is a state of incident management that you just need to continue towards, relating back to the earlier diagram. Now, essentially, all these kind of conditions will lead towards what is represented on the right. Have you established the necessary cyber incident response teams and crisis management teams, the opportunity to escalate and manage the situation as it develops? The clear definition of roles and responsibility, and who is the deciding authority at different thresholds? What is the escalation and threshold criteria for one state to move into the other? Whether the collective organization is sufficiently aware of what they need to do, what kind of situations they need to be able to address, and actually running through simulation exercises to gain the level of familiarity. Next will really be about the incident response plans, playbooks, crisis management plans, business continuity plans, disaster recovery plans, and last but not least, really the crisis communication plans. Many times when we work with our clients, we realize that, definitely there is a BCP plan, definitely there's a disaster recovery plan, but the crisis communication plan is something that is left unaddressed. And so when people start knocking at the door and ask, can I have more information about it? They clam up and they fear what they are revealing, not knowing what to say, and the pressure mounts. Thus, the escalation rises more rapidly than necessary. This is an illustration in terms of a typical organization structure, and it's really to illustrate how the incident response teams and the crisis management teams can then work together. Now, from the board of directors for medium-sized to larger organization, clearly there will be the board of directors. The crisis management team would then naturally be encompassed and by the C-suite people and led by one of the authorities within the C-suite. Now, you will notice that the CEO is not a part of this construct. And that the reason being that the CEO in this illustration would be dealing with the more important measures about addressing other concerns that are external to the organization. And the CMT can really deal with what is the crisis decision making at hand. Why the Chief Operations Officer is largely because the Chief Operations Officer needs to take care of ensuring that business carries on as much as possible. Right. Going down to the next level, we have the CSIRT, which is the incident response team. And these will be the tactical forces that are really going down to the ground to see what is the real incident at hand and be able to figure out what are the actions that needs to be taken to respond to it and be able to advise recovery measures towards the larger community. Right. So these will typically be led by the Chief Information Security Officer, which will possibly assimilate the information that he receives from the monitoring activities that the Cybersecurity Operations Center can take. Now, one other feature that I will call out is the CMT Secretariat. Clearly, everyone in the C-suite, they all have decisions they need to make, but there are also logistic actions that need to be carried out. The CMT Secretariat basically is an additional administrative pool of people that can then support all these leaders in terms of the coordination activities, ensuring that the administrative actions and the logistics are actually carried out. Some of the activities could be ensuring that decisions that have been discussed are truly documented so that there is a necessary audit trail to allow people to revisit what were the decision points made earlier. Other things could be organizing the crisis management room or operation center to be ready for such discussions, establishing the likes of Zoom calls or web conferencing facilities to be able to facilitate these communications. And if necessary, really to chase down all the necessary stakeholders to be participating in the crisis management team. Now, I think Xiaofei mentioned earlier about the concept of readiness and resiliency. And I think this readiness and resiliency really comes from peacetime preparations. How much activity you can do to prepare yourselves, the organizations across the people, process, and technology to be able to address all the possible actions right up front so that you have them prepared. So that when the incident actually happens, you can go through it with a steady pair of hands, understanding what you need to do. Now, some possible actions preparing for the incident and the crisis. On the left-hand side, basically, is all the peacetime preparations that you want to do, right? Crisis management plan, as I mentioned before, business continuity plan, disaster recovery plan, and the crisis communication plans. And the more tactical levels, you're really looking at incident response playbooks and runbooks, communications call tree, knowing that these are the primary persons that you need to call, and as well as the secondary or backup persons for each functional role. And the escalation criteria and what are the conditions that will trigger an escalation. On the activities that can be done during peacetime is really about continuous horizon scanning for situation awareness, being able to arrive at that visibility and understanding whether a situation is about to develop or not develop. This continuous cyber monitoring, particularly for cyber, would be a security operations center, ensuring that the spokesperson for the company have gone through media training, that they understand how they should represent themselves in front of media, how they should convey certain messages and behave in front of the camera. Simulation exercises are very beneficial, and really doing simulation exercises at the tactical level, for example, cyber range, at the operational level, which could be tabletop exercises, and war games, which really string across strategy, operations, and tactics together. Lastly next would be actually the establishment of rapport and protocols across the internal and external stakeholders. And this will allow a more frictionless approach in coordination, especially in a state of crisis, where you may have to engage external authorities, you may have to deal with your business partners and your supply chain. Continuous media and brand reputation management is necessary to be able to build up that wealth of goodwill. And I think many a times, other than the marketing people being very cognizant of what brand goodwill means, actually in a time of crisis, you really need to tap into that goodwill bank to be able to then buy trust and enable a more manageable conversation with all the relevant stakeholders. Lastly, a very technical aspect is, and cannot be stressed enough, especially with ransomware being more and more rampant, is the activity of backing up and archival and ensuring that you have the opportunity to recover. And all these, the outcomes is really this. You want to be able to achieve control as soon as possible so that you can beat the chaos. You want to ensure that you arrive at trust and familiarity towards the response and recovery actions. You want to make sure that the decision makers are first and foremost comfortable with decision making and driving the actions. You also want to consider about the opportunities for discovery of crisis potential. And in that sense, it's almost a risk management activity so that you can determine when do you lead towards a mobilization of response and the resources that you actually need in a state of incident and crisis. The readiness to communicate and actually dominate reputation mindshare. I use this word dominate because it's absolutely important today in the state where we have misinformation campaigns that go about, or just the gossip mill that runs rampant, particularly with social media. It is important that an organization have a plan to be able to ride above the noise, all this misinformation, to be able to have the say and make sure that the right messages are continuously conveyed across. Next will actually be establishing the operational rhythm within the organization so that there is a cadence in ensuring the information dissemination and the organizational awareness. Sometimes in the state of crisis, we focus a lot about the external stakeholders for fear of the larger ramifications, particularly the authorities. But we neglect our internal people about their awareness and their discomfort in addressing the chaos. So having that operational rhythm and organizing that approach towards communicating to external stakeholders and internal stakeholders will clearly help everyone address the situation better. Lastly, it is the actions and decision log for the tracing of activities. This log enables organizations to actually revisit certain actions called out at the start of the incident or at the start of the crisis and be able to derive learning opportunities of how you can improve going forward. And lastly, that's my last slide. I'm Xiang Zhen. Happy to receive any questions if there are any.
Okay, thank you so much, Xiang Zhen, for the sharing. It was very, very informative. And just a reminder to the participants, if you have any questions, you can feel free to use the Q&A button on the Zoom platform, and we'll address the questions later after all the speakers have done their sharing. So up next, I'd like to invite Ryan from Trend Michael to share about ransomware. So Ryan, please.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Ryan from Trend Micro, and I will be sharing with you the trends on what we see regarding ransomware, which I think is, the most damaging cyber attack there is that we have ongoing right now. So this is more of an awareness for you guys on to know how it arrives into the system. And towards the end, I would share some tips on how you can, possibly recover from a ransomware should a ransomware attack happen to your organization or your network. So ransomware, there are actually a lot of things that needs to happen before the actual ransomware happens, right? So the ransomware needs to arrive somewhat to the network via an email, web page, or a previous infection. Right? That ransomware needs to contact the command and control server because the ransomwares today, what they would do is that they would generate a unique encryption key for each victim, right? And this unique encryption key is the key to why this good ransomware business works. So whenever there's a new victim, the ransomware would need to send the key over to the attacker or to the person or the group that is behind the ransomware attack. And then after that, the ransomware would search for important files in the machine, encrypt those important files, and then the ransom note will then be shown. So as you can see here, there's a lot of different steps before the user actually sees the actual ransomware note or ransomware screen. And by the time that the user sees that note and that screen, it's actually too late because the ransomware has performed all of its actions, right? That is why, for example, in defending against ransomware, the best point of the defense is during the early phase of the process, right? So if the security product can detect it in the arrival phase, that's well and good, or on the contact phase through the command and control communication, that's also good, or through the action, for example, in the searching, or when it's about to encrypt, right? But not on the last phase, which is when the ransomware note is displayed. So any point before that, the last two phases are fully executed, and those are the chances when we're in a security product is able to protect a particular endpoint or a particular server. So I will be discussing in the next few slides how the various techniques that the ransomware arrives. So for example, here is an example of how a ransomware arrives via email. So normally a threat actor would just spam several emails to several targets with the social engineering lure in the email, maybe it's in the subject, and then commonly it's the attachment that is the ransomware. Okay, so that attachment, if you receive that email, you open up the attachment, turns out it's ransomware, then that's how the ransomware will arrive. All right. Now, as you can see here, there is on the left would be how it arrives on the system, and on the right is how it would look like when the ransomware fully executes, right? So this is after the command and control communication, after the searching, and after the encryption. This is what you would see, right? So from email to that one on the right on the note, it would take about a minute or 5 minutes for the whole encryption to happen. Now, other ransomwares will arrive via a web exploit kit. So this can be a website that is built to attract web traffic. It can be a website that is being advertised through spam emails or through redirections from other websites that you are looking at. So a lot of traffic redirection websites, so if you're browsing ads, and then there's links to other news articles or gossips. This is the common avenues for this type of attacks. So what happens is that you get redirected to a malicious website. That website would then install the ransomware on your machine. So commonly here, it gets installed because there's a vulnerability in the web browser. So web browser meaning Internet Explorer, Chrome, or Firefox, right? So this is why you would need to patch these web browsers, because the web browsers can be avenues for installing ransomware or other malwares, right? So hence, if you patch these or consistently update the patch level of these web browsers, you significantly lower the bar, or what do you call it, the likelihood that you would be victimized by ransomware. So on the left is an example of a recent website that we've seen that is hosting exploit kit to install ransomware. So it's pretending to be a blockchain website, and then if you access this and then your web browser is vulnerable, the ransomware will execute and you would see a ransom log like the one on the right. Okay. One of the things that is not talked about, and I would like to spend a few minutes here explaining this, is that there's a third method on how a ransomware arrives in a particular computer or a particular network, and that is what we call post-exploitation. This means that there's already a previous infection that is running in that endpoint, in the computer, or in the network, right? So here's an example of 3 malwares that is related. So on the top one is Emotet. On the second one below that is TrickBot, and the third one is Ryuk. So Emotet, it's a botnet. It gets distributed similarly to how other ransomware gets distributed, through email, through malicious websites that have exploit code in them that exploits vulnerabilities, right? So this Emotet, what it does is just a botnet. It's what we call a pay per install botnet, right? So what happens is that the operators of Emotet, the group behind Emotet, would advertise to other cyber criminals and say, I'm able to infect 10,000, 20,000 computers. Do you want me to install ransomware for you on those computers that I've already infected? And in effect, because I've already infected these computers, I control these computers. So that is their business model. Their business model goes more than that, in fact, such that a malicious actor can tell the Emotet group and say, I want to infect 1,000 computers in Singapore only. Right? So it can be targeted like that, right? So Emotet, what we've seen with Emotet is that it installs TrickBot. TrickBot is not a ransomware. It's an information stealing malware. So what it does is it gets your cached passwords in your browser, it gets your Outlook passwords, and it also has keylogging capabilities. Right? So this is how a lot of, for example, Facebook accounts get compromised, how a lot of internal websites get compromised, or banking credentials get stolen, right? So, but as you can see, there's more infection of Emotet than TrickBot than Ryuk. And Ryuk is the actual ransomware. So what happens is that the attackers, they try to profile first the endpoint that they were able to infect. And if it's a critical endpoint, right? So if it belongs to a company, for example, and that computer contains sensitive financial information or database files or other documents that are important to the business, then they install a ransomware and then ransom those files, because the likelihood that the victim would be able to would pay to recover those files would be higher. So this is actually one of the things that they do to ensure the success rate of payment of their ransomwares, right? So this has been going on for quite some time. So this is actually a notification from US CERT explaining how Emotet, TrickBot, and Ryuk actually works is connected to each other. So they're on stages, right? So first and third would be the Emotet one. Fourth would be the TrickBot and Ryuk ransomware one. So as you can see on the fourth one, then it steals the credentials. So it also is able to steal SMB credentials, which means that it can move laterally or to other computers inside the local network. Right? So what happens actually in this stage is this is where the attackers would make the decision. Do I install TrickBot to this particular computer so that I can continue moving laterally within the organization, within the network? Or Ryuk, which is the ransomware, because this is an important machine that I can ransom, and most likely the victim is going to pay, right? Now, this is one statistic that we've gathered, started monitoring in Trend Micro since 2016, when ransomware activity was really high. The red one, right, is the one for ransomwares arriving through email. The blue one is the one where ransomwares are arriving through websites that has exploit codes in it, right, that installs ransomware. And the black one is the ransomwares that gets installed by Emotet and other botnets just like it. You know, the post-intrusion technique, as we call it, right? So as you can see here, not only has the number of ransomware detections went down since 2016, but the distribution of how it arrives actually evolved significantly from mostly email-based arrival to mostly post-intrusion ransomware arrival, right? So through a previous infection. Right? And this is also the reason why, even though there's not a lot of ransomware out there that Trend Micro is detecting, ransomware is still in the news because it's affecting businesses. It's not affecting the common people. It's affecting businesses that really needs those database files, those documents, you know, in order to conduct their business. And that is key on how the ransomware groups have learned to operate their ransomware business model. You know, it's better to target businesses first, or businesses mostly, than target, you know, than being able to infect a lot of machines, but those machines don't pay, right? So it's better to have a high conversion rate than to have a high infection rate. And one of the things that Trend Micro has noticed is that for the past few months, the amount of ransomware has actually been increasing. We've been detecting more ransomware since around March, when most of the lockdown has started. And it's quite an alarming development because you know, most people most organizations have not planned for the scenario of people working from home. So the security policies, security measures, and security security software has not put in place, right? So I remember during the first few months of the lockdown, even just having your own work machine is already a challenge. What more having a secure work machine and a secure connection and secure work environment, right? So, and I think a lot of the attackers have realized this and is actually using the current setup, the current panic and unpreparedness of organizations, and are profiting from it. And it has it has been reflected in the news and what we've also been seeing. That schools, for example, were forced to close or forced to stop their distance learning because of ransomware attacks, and even hospitals, as mentioned in the opening, right, has been ransomed and even resulting to deaths. There is anecdote. This is just an anecdote. In my company, we're a security company. We have been talking that will ransomware go down in this pandemic, or will they be more selective in their victimization? Because if they ransom a hospital, which is critical in a pandemic, would they have the heart and soul to ransom a hospital? And we were hoping that they would have the heart and soul not to do that, but apparently they don't. And the news in the last few months has proven that cyber criminals would, spare no excuse and target even critical healthcare in this time of the pandemic. So to close my particular session, I would like to point out that ransomware is a business. Right? So if I have not made it clear in the last few slides, ransomware is a business. It's run not by geeks, not by techie people, but most likely it is operated by criminal gangs, criminal groups, and this is just one of their ways to make money, right? So and if you think of it this way, this is you can factor it as one of the major risks that an organization would have in this, currently and in the foreseeable future, because people are actually profiting from this, and it's more likely to continue unless we put a dent in their business model by protecting ourselves and making good security hygiene and making good user education against ransomware, right? So, which brings me to my second point. Safety is needed when we open emails, when we visit websites, and we take care of our office environments. Hygiene, security hygiene, endpoint hygiene, network hygiene is very important, because even if it's just an infection, if you get infected by a malware that is not a ransomware, that previous infection can lead to a ransomware malware, as I've discussed. So hygiene is really important, and making good decisions in opening attachments, browsing websites, and performing patches and scans really come into play here. You might need to consider also software as a service. There's a lot of on-the-cloud services that are available right now for document sharing, for document editing, and if you can use those software as a service as a big part of your business, then the information that you store on servers that you maintain, on endpoints that you maintain, would be less. So the impact of a ransomware event, if it happens, would be less, and that you can just choose maybe not to pay the ransom because the critical documents that you have, the critical systems that you have, is already in the cloud, right? So this is one way to look into the cloud. And again, if you cannot do a hybrid model or a full cloud model, offline backup is one of the keys to recovery. So if you have regular backup of your databases, not only of your database, but the files on various endpoints, right? Then it would make recovery much easier, to the point that if you have a very recent backup and you can work from that, you might not need to even pay the ransom and just throw away the already infected machine, buy a new one, start from scratch, or from the backup that you have. So those are the key points that I have that you can take into consideration. There's also a URL below for the most recent report that we had for ransomware, and it's something that you can visit, that you can read once we're done here, so that you keep updated with with the latest trend in ransomware and other attacks. So thank you. And yeah, I can answer questions during the panel.
Okay, thank you, Ryan, so much for your sharing, because it's definitely very useful for us to have a deeper understanding about ransomware. And also, I think one of the key points that was highlighted is that the security issue, everyone has a part to play. It's not just something that the IT or the cybersecurity department needs to be aware of. So welcome to all the participants who joined along the way. And we are about midway through our sharing. So I'd like to invite our third speaker of the day, Johnny from TrustWave, and he'll be sharing more about cyber resiliency. So Johnny, please.
Yeah, thanks. So I think rightfully put, I think what we just mentioned, right? Cybersecurity is actually everybody's responsibility. So one of the things I'm actually from this topic that I look at it when I think it's all about cyber resiliency in today's concept, right? And I think in terms of you, even as an individual or even as part of organization, how do you see yourself? And that's really where are you going to be a liability or actually an asset to the organization itself? So when we take a look at that, I think today, one of the key things we can see is that the world actually has transformed. In fact, it has been transforming. It's just that probably with COVID, this has actually been more accelerated. And some of the key things that come out of it is that data becomes a very important part of business decisions. Ability and accuracy becomes really that key consideration every time you look at how you can actually make your business decisions. Platforms actually needs to be very agile and able to really react to the market demands, the customer demands, and things like that. While on the other side, I think costs and in terms of optimization operations become also a key portion. And one other key thing is that the ecosystem, the supply chain becomes part of that key consideration today if you are actually looking at how the digital transformation actually comes about. A lot of times, the key part that you look at it was at the same time while you're looking at collaboration, you are actually looking at how that can go beyond in terms of innovation mindset as well. So with that, ultimately, I think this statement has come out quite often, and digitalization actually has become inevitable, and especially in the current state, it has become a consideration how you could actually sustain your business or like your livelihood. And it must be actually something to plan for as well. And the key thing that I think where it actually creates key changes, I think, is especially in the work culture. So today, I think for most of us, either you're actually doing telecommute or you work from home, key technologies comes out up front. While we talk about, I think cloud has become a mainstay of a consideration in any IT budget. Mobility becomes that connectivity, and that also moves on to a big topic of IoT, Internet of Things as well. But out of all this, one of the key things that really drives it is actually there's a need to actually have a change in mindset. And this change in mindset actually is something that is difficult because in the digital world, unlike the physical world, when we perceive risk and resilience, it's not so tangible. So, for example, I think if we talk about you losing something like the data is still there, but you may have actually have it been stolen or actually been, I think, locked up from you in terms of a ransomware, and that's actually the more immediate ones. So this actually mindset becomes also the way that I think we need to, how we actually have to work, collaborate, think as well as. And the thing is really what I think even brought up in the earlier speakers. I think a lot of times you need to really do a lot of planning, awareness, and before you even execute in that sense. Yeah. So I took a step to, I think, define cyber resilience. I think this is something just to, typically I like to make things a bit more simple. So if you want to say, in general sense, I think it's really ability to respond yes, crisis is actually the ultimate consideration. Continuity in terms of operations and outcomes is really the key part, right? So that fundamental question you're going to answer is, are you ready? I think in terms of the risks, the threats, and the response that you need to do. And why is this important? Because today, I think if we look at the whole landscape, right, being digital actually means that there is a constant connectivity. You're always interconnected, and there is actually constant data exchange. A lot of times today when we start to look at systems, we don't actually just look at pure architecture, we actually look at how the data actually flow. So this becomes a more bigger consideration. And actually out of this, if we look at it positively, right, every data exchange actually, while it presents an opportunity to learn, understand, or actually derive certain decisions, it also poses a risk as you do the sharing as well. And most of the key things are, I think when people ask me about what do we really focus on, ultimately is boils down to two things. I think data and identity is actually the key assets you look at today, right? I mean, and identity, sometimes when you talk about it, it also boils down to what is the role of the person in the company or so on. So, for example, if you talk about the CEO, then that identity and role actually is very important. So how do you do this? In a lot of cases, I think in the past, we always thought about people's process and technology. Actually, one key part, which is probably the most difficult, is actually how do you actually have a program or actually to change the mindset. Processes, but processes, I think, always suffer from another key issue of, is it enforceable? Is it actually known? And of course, really having the tools to actually enable this as well, right? So with that, I want to bring to point, I think one of the things, be it as individuals, organizations, sometimes you do actually have to look at your digital footprint. Why is this so? Because it really means that's actually how you will actually assess your risk in terms of exposure. I think in the traditional world, typically, we only look at the office, but today, things have started to move to the cloud, and there's actually sometimes both the corporate as well as the social or personal. So a lot of times, I think you hear terms like shadow IT and so on, but that is really the concern when things start to overlap. And with the current situation, I think with the home office, this really tends to overlap. So you have to see that you are using machines interchangeably on your personal network and together with your corporate devices and things like that. And of course, on the largest part is, of course, the home mobility and the need to actually use more end devices, even to the level of IoT, to actually gain that information. And all of this actually, if you look at it, the data is actually everywhere. And every data, while it, like what I say, presents an opportunity for you to harvest it, to actually analyze it, also potentially presents a risk that you actually have to face, especially if it's something that's of critical, right? And sometimes the key thing that I want to really remind people that, and which is actually quite something that we sometimes forget, that actually we are the people that actually possess data, right? A lot of the key things today is really all about us. I think our personal information, and of course, whatever is financial assets related, that is, of course, to what our role we play in organization and so on. All these are actually key things that you need to understand yourself, and of course, for the organization to see how you actually handle it as well. So the handling part really plays a big part, because this is where, on one part, you know that I think data analytics businesses are really looking at you as the source of the data and something they can make their business. The same thing, the cyber criminals will actually be targeting you as well. And then if you fall back to the earlier statement about digital footprint, sometimes if we think about it, if the organization has the same risk in terms of the digital footprint, you as an individual, if you talk about social networks, sometimes that is also bringing risk to yourself. So if you look at certain information here, I think a very common mistakes, I would say it's a mistake, but it is very common for us to share our birth date, but that is actually quite a lot of times actually quite a personal information as well. So when we talk about the issue of, I think I highlight the thing about liability. So maybe just to zero in on something that is very close to heart and what we actually hear every day today in terms of the data privacy. So, I mean, PDPA has been enforced for a while, but I think one of the key things that is really upcoming in terms of some of the proposed changes will really play a key part, right? There is actually going to be more accountability being strengthened. I think this is actually a good progress. There's also clarity in terms of how it's considered deemed, implied consent. Also giving consumers better control about in terms of as they request how the data can be shared across. And most importantly, which is actually going to be the key part, which is the enforcement of the. So if we talk about that, the two key highlights today, if you look at it as, mandatory data breach reporting has become a key thing. And why I state it as a liability, because now it is actually statutory. It is a legal undertaking. This is something that, while in the past, I think you, a lot of cases, you do actually consult your lawyers in terms of if you are actually in breach or anything, but today that will actually be even more important in terms of how you represent yourself. And do note that the penalties actually has gone really up. So in the past, the upper limit is actually 1 million. Today, the lower limit is actually 1 million and up to 10% of your. So these are really considerations when not only for the organization, but the individual will actually really need to be aware, I think, what they will bring about if they are actually not in, observing data privacy obligations and proper data handling procedures as well. So when I come to that, I think one of the key things we maybe something interesting that people probably won't be familiar. I think how do we become asset? Most of the time, I think this conversation is that we really want to move the people to be playing a part of the business, right? The business owner mindset. And how do you actually have a business owner mindset? I think one of the key things a lot of times when we talk about the governance framework actually is to have that risk-thinking culture. The risk-thinking culture actually brings the employees or the closer to actually be part of the business and to actually be able to execute, in terms of their accountability and responsibility. So a lot of times that is really means that you need to be fully aware of the risks. So in risk thinking, that actually helps to do a think before you act. I think today that's really a lot on how you do risk management. And then of course, the other key part is also to be able to be accountable means that, well, I can say sometimes trust is overrated, where you need to actually verify and confirm when you are something that you are accountable for in terms of the process and things. And in doing this, I would say that actually it helps to, in certain ways, actually it helps to mitigate some of the human-driven type of things where it's actually be phishing, social engineering, or scams. This is actually typically taken from an approach on a cyber education perspective. Of course, it has to be combined with some sort of a carrot and stick approach within the organization, and so on. So this really helps to progressively bring along a mindset change. Of course, this is not a silver bullet, and we need to look at how other ways you can actually do it. So when we talk about the individual, I think one of the key things today, I think every organization will actually look at policy and procedures that you define. But sometimes this is the part where it needs to be clear, it needs to be accessible even as a knowledge management. I think typical examples here, not something totally different, but where it actually goes down to a level, if you look at it, even be able to report on incidents, be clear on the business continuity and incident response procedures are key things to be actually aware on as well. So really what this brings about is really to actually help you mitigate that whole data breach impact. I think like in the latest speaker where they talk about incident response, this is really that preparedness that you have, right? And how do you do that? I think in some cases, it could be as simple as talk about email handling reminders, text on the emails that you are actually getting an email from an external source. Of course, the other way is having the ability to access such information as well. And of course, the policies itself needs to also start to be more granular in terms of defining even role basis type of access down to the application data that needs to be clear as well. So that's it. I think end of the day, how I mean, like what we said, policy and processes are useless if you can't enforce it. So tools actually become that key part, right? And of course, the tools, some of it is very fundamental and hygiene, like making sure the systems are up to date, your endpoint and device protection is always going to be there. And of course, I think it goes down to even looking at, I think, where you need to start to segregate personal and workspace things, start looking at password managers even on an individual basis, having a good habit of even turning on authentication, and that could actually apply across not only for, I would say, from a corporate perspective, but even on a personal level. So, and of course, even for collaboration platforms, going down granular to really be able to zoom in on the identity and have controls in terms of people accessing it as well. But the ultimate thing, if we talk about, I'm not going to too much details, is really you need to have something that is more centralized, giving you that overall visibility and controls that you firstly to be able to be aware of what goes on, but also to be able to quickly control it, mitigate it down to potentially the endpoint when you need to. And that seems to be a consideration as you look at the tools that you. So we shouldn't, I think today when we talk about cybersecurity tools, you should not operate in silo. Today it needs to actually cut across whatever you look at from a systems perspective down to the organization. And it is to be able to also cater to the different audiences. So not only from the technical, but even to, as we talk about the earlier obligations, even to actually be able to, on continuous basis, provide that risk posture even to the management. That would be actually the ideal and the holy grail that we will be looking at as well. So that's it. So as we talk about this, I think in my, I would say even my volunteer work outside, I do a lot with SME, and probably one of the key things that I think we look at it today is that even in Singapore itself, SMEs are actually the key part of the whole economy and ecosystem. And sometimes one of the things while we are talking about the typical enterprises, there is actually a whole ecosystem that's actually building up and progressing towards us. And of course, this is just some example. I think looking a look from how CSA was formed in terms of resources that's available online, as well as what is actually done in terms of our own pre-scope IT solutions for security. So these are some of the areas that you can actually further explore, I think, even after this, or if there's any questions, I think we could actually address it and even share more during the panel itself. So with that, I really wanted to take one step back and just a few key takeaways. So I think with the current state, I think the first thing on the mindset is that, transformation is always a journey. A lot of times as we need to change the mindset that, you need to continually looking at the next level you need to bring the business to, or even apply a concept of continuous learning, right? Be aware that I think the data actually, while you are actually producing the data, it is actually you as well. And you need to be able to be aware how you actually handle all data as well. And reminder that securing yourself is really securing your livelihood, I think, in a long time. So definitely, I think that's what I would say the quick message I want to to the audience, I think, today is how you can bring yourself to be the asset to the organization and not be part of that liability when a breach actually happens as well. So with that, end off my session on this. Good. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Johnny, and also thanks to Ryan and Xiangzhen for the sharing just now. So we have come to the end of the first part of our session, which is the 3 different topics that we covered earlier. And for those participants who joined along the way, welcome again. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to use the Q&A function of Zoom to ask any of the panelists. So right now, I'll just do a quick summary and wrap up what the three speakers have shared. So for Xiang Zhen, he shared a lot about cyber incidents and how to manage them even before a crisis hit, because for all these things, there's a Chinese saying that goes is 未雨绸缪, which is in English is preparing for a rainy day. So even before things happen, you need to be aware and also be prepared just in case something happens. Then next, Ryan shared a lot of in-depth detail of how a ransomware could work and how it actually would affect an organization. So this cuts across all industries because ransomware can affect anyone and at any level and any staff, because it manifests itself in different ways. So definitely for this, everyone has a part to play, and we all need to be more vigilant about what's going on, and not just rely on the IT team or the cybersecurity team to be mitigating such risk as well. So for Johnny also, he wrapped up also about cyber resiliency, also highlighting the point that everybody has a part to play, and it's very important to be aware of some of the trends of what is going on and actually to help the organization be a more secure environment. So one of the key things that I think that cuts across all three speakers is that there's actually a great change in the way that we work, and also going towards more digitization, largely because of the current situation where most of us, in some way or other, even though we are transiting to a new normal, working from home is turning to something that is for us a new normal, which is not so prevalent for many job roles. That's why as things get digitized and we are using more of solutions, even what we are using now for Zoom, because previously if we have any sharing session or events, it very likely is a physical event. So these are some of the things that we are moving towards, and definitely it makes cybersecurity more important. So thank you everyone for your time.